Welcome to another episode of Creative Mind, and I'm Bobby Brill. I hope you're ready for a very intense talk that goes all over the place. You are definitely going to have to strap in, grab some pens, grab some notepads, a lot to unpack here with illustrator and educator Robert Revels. He is somebody who has been doing this for a very long time, before digital, embraced digital early on, and is somebody who has a great way of looking at how you need to live as an artist, what your mindset needs to be. Not just the talent, but how you put yourself in the right headspace to have a career as an artist. And very quickly, please subscribe on whatever device you're listening to so you never miss an episode of Creative Mind, because we have a lot of great artists and illustrators and designers and educators coming up in the weeks ahead. So please hit subscribe. Now, here is Robert Revels. You're one of those awesomely rare people that is a working artist and an educator. I stress that working artist concept because you've actually just been able to make a living as an artist. What is it you do to be a working artist now?
Usually it's freelance projects. It can be illustration. Sometimes it's really rare things that will come in that I'll end up illustrating for that I would have never dreamed of. It might be something that might be a textbook. I've done movie. It was a makeup artist for movies, and she needed illustrations explaining that stuff. And these are things I would have never dreamed that I would be doing. So these contracts come through, and you grab them, you pick them up, you run with it. So you never really know what you're going to get. For me, to be a working illustrator, you have to be open to opportunities and open to doing things that outside of the scope of what you thought you originally were going to do.
And you give yourself that title of illustrator. Is there a difference between illustrator and fine artist, or is it just a label?
It's a label, to be honest with you. I mean, I got my degree in illustration. So, and I teach illustrators, but I also teach people in game. And for me, the core concepts, the core skills of being an artist are just true fundamentals. And if you understand core fundamentals, about good design, right? Composition, and this goes to music, a composition, they use the same terminology. So it's like, you have to understand how to design something that's, if it's music, very melodic, there's crescendos. You've got to think about how to be very intense or bring it way down, right? Music, and I'm using music right now because it's something we all can just relate to. It's like if you put on, spa music, it puts you in a certain tone. Well, it's the same thing with visual artists, right? The way we put our images together, we can trigger an emotional response instantaneously. And so if you can understand that, you can pretty much do anything. Because whether it's photography, and I was telling my class this today, actually, whether it's interior design, concept art, if you know how to push a button and make people feel a certain way, you can shift and you'll always be in demand, because that's what people want. People want to be moved. It's not just sitting down and saying, okay, I'm an illustrator, so I only do such and such. If you go that route, I think you can put yourself in a box. And I'll just say this, there's also some aspects of specialization that are important for marketing and to if people are trying to get a job specifically in an industry like game design or something like that. But I would just say this, many of the game designers, most of those people were illustrators. Even there are some really wonderful graphic designers that started off as illustrators. Some of my students went on to do UI design. And so the way I teach is very specific because I want people to have these core skills so they're flexible later. I think the thing that's kept me valuable and has brought value to me, my name, and all those things at school is because I've done a little bit of everything. And so although it seems like I'm a jack of all trades, I'm the master, again, of those core principles. And that's why it gives the illusion like I can do a lot. Right?
The illusion.
Yeah, right? So I do that, and it's really paid off for me, right? It's just really paid off for me.
It's interesting because, I want people to, go to your website. It's robertrevels.com, Revels. And one of the things
hold
I
on,
noticed
sorry, I meant to cut off. And the typical artist disclaimer, a lot of that's really old. I'll be putting some new stuff up there, but anyway.
The thing that I notice right away, other than the work is amazing, is there's not a lot of advertising illustration per se. There's not the here's an illustration of the Campbell soup can and the happy kid eating it. It's got much more of a fantasy comic book, darker sensibility to it. Is that something that you were always into, or is that just kind of the work you like to showcase?
That's marketing, right? That's business, right? So, but it is what I like as well. So, when I first started off as a kid, I was passionate about sports. That was what I was into. I was an athlete, so I like to draw a lot of athletes. Then when I came to art school, look, I grew up on Star Wars. I was obsessed like every other little kid. I think that motivated all of us to get into design.
I think if Star Wars didn't exist, there wouldn't be an art business right now. It seems
really,
like, it's like Dungeons and Dragons and Star Wars, whether you're into them or not, if they don't exist, none of us have careers.
Exactly. I mean, I would sit up late at night because I to this day, I have a hard time sleeping at night. My energy turns on at like 9 or 10, and it's just what it is. And I tried to train myself, but I was a little kid, and I remember, I think it was Dark Crystal, and there was a lot of those things on HBO as a little kid. This was way back when they didn't have all the cable stuff. They would show these making of, and they would show them doing matte paintings on this stuff. And I was a little kid, and I'm looking at this, mind blown, right? And so I've just always loved that stuff. I've always loved fantasy. I always loved sci-fi. Obsessed with it.
Oh, then what was it? The end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where everyone's just like I grew. I mean, for me, those behind the scenes things, what got me into film production and things like that was like that looks like the coolest thing ever. But that matte painting of the Star Wars matte painting and the Raiders of the Lost Ark matte painting, where it's like somebody painted that.
And that was like my motivation. And the irony is, but then I also liked fine art too. But when I came to school, I thought, honestly, this is right when McFarlane and all those guys broke off to do image. So like this is right when it was hot, and then the implosion. That was right when I was starting school. It was just still hot.
So that's what, 92?
It was right around there. I started school in, I believe art school, I think it was 91 maybe, because there was and I always remember it based off of a magazine cover that had a really cool illustration on it, and I was at an art store. And I remember that magazine, I think it was 1991. And so that's when I started art school, and I was like, I'm going to go in here to be a comic guy. That's what I wanted to do. And when I got in,
because that was Seth MacFarlane. Was it Spawn?
Yeah, that was like just popping off. And my nature is I'm sort of I'm more of a risk taker, and I like the idea of having some control and say. And the thought of like these guys doing that was like right up my alley in terms of attitude and bravado. And it was also the fact they were just doing some really cool stuff. And so I was like, I'm going to do that, right? That's what I want to do. But then it was really weird. I got in art school, and then I started discovering all this art, and I was exposed to so much. And then I just start going into sort of like just different paths. And then I just really never really reconnected back to that much until I was actually out of school.
Oh, really? So Dark Horse and Image and this whole we against the world mentality, and in sports too. That was also the time that Shaq is coming up in the NBA, because I was big into sports and sports memorabilia and sports cards at the time, which we're going to talk about. Yeah, there was that time in the early 90s, right before the internet took off, where everything is fundamentally changing. It's a big change in modern multimedia. The concept of multimedia is going to become a thing very soon.
Yeah.
But what was it that you were exposed to in school that you saw that really changed you? Were there some specific pieces or artists?
When I first started school, I was working, and this is why I said, there was this magazine called Airbrush Action. And, and I was into airbrush at the time. So I was like, I self-taught. I'm the type of person, I'll teach myself. So self-taught, I went and bought all this stuff and learned how to do airbrushing, and I would sell clothes and stuff like that in the street, right? That's how I made my money, and that's how I made money in school. A lot of it, just hustler. So I had a fascination with the airbrush, and that sort of was the technology of the time. So some people didn't embrace it, some people did. But on the cover, there was this King Kong painting. And I'll never forget it. I was working, and it was boring. I don't know if it was Sunday or whatever. I was like losing my mind bored. And then this magazine was there and I saw it. And it was a King Kong painting. And I was like, they did this in airbrush? That's what I thought, right? And I looked at, who is this guy? His name was Thomas Blackshear. And later on, I just became so obsessed with him. And I think it was partly because of the initial reaction of that painting. And, and so I looked inside, read the article. I'm like, wow, I bought it and took it home and just devoured it. And then I had no idea that he would teach workshops at the academy. And that was the beginning of a monumental shift for me, because I thought it was airbrush, but it was like a gouache painting with a little bit of airbrush. When what he was doing, and when I looked at the magazine, it was an airbrush magazine, but some of the paintings were oil, some were acrylic, some were very painterly, some were very realistic, hyper detailed. It was like this broad diaspora of work. And I was like, what? And that just made me get out of the sense of like just being in this narrow scope. And then he had a workshop, and I was like a freshman. I shouldn't have been in that workshop. And it was, and I don't even think I had a real class at the school. And it was at the school, and it was like all these people who went to art school and graduated all across the country were showing up for this thing. And it was in this small little room. He comes in here, tall guy, and everybody in there was amazing. And I'm like, I'm just sitting here like a freshman. All I know is my airbrush, and I don't even know it. And he's walking and talking, and people are like, just like fawning all over him. Like he's like this god. And I'm like, this is crazy, right? But he was so good. He was just so good. And like I said, then he started showing me, because he was an apprentice to Mark English. And I had a book that had all these samples. I don't know. I think someone taught me this in school, but because we didn't have technology. So whenever we could find an illustration in a magazine or a book, or we used to have these annuals, we were obsessed. We were like just little nerdy freaks. We would rip everything out.
Even a 2-year-old marketing review, you're like, I kind of need to keep this. How do I keep this thing? Because you couldn't get this stuff anywhere.
It was a big deal. It was like cherished gold, right? And it was like, if you found, it was sort of like the hip hop artists when they were looking through vinyls, trying to find that one little nugget to do something. That was what it was like then. It's like you're trying to find that one illustration that no one's seen that was going to inspire you. And so I had some Mark English stuff and all these things, and I didn't know anybody's name. I didn't know anything. I just stored it in my book. And I remember he kind of walked over and, and he looked at my book and said, I worked on that. So I was apprentice, and I helped on that one. And he just started talking, and I was like, yeah, I don't even know their, and he was just like, look, you need to know who these people are, know their names. And then by doing that, I just start looking at these people and looking at who they were inspired by. And it just opened my world up. I just start liking so much. It was like Art Nouveau, J.C. Leyendecker. I think most students go this fascination with the past, like N.C. Wyeth, Howard Pyle. Especially at the Academy, we're very big on the historical aspect of illustration and design. But that stuff still is very relevant, because like Dean Cornwell worked on, I believe it was some concepts for The Robe. It was one of those movies. And so it's like, to me, it's all the same. That's why we said that earlier. It's like illustration design. It just depends what I'm applying for at the moment. That's what I'll say I am, right? But yeah, but that was what changed me. That was definitely it.
Where did you grow up? Did you grow up in the Bay Area?
Yes, or? I grew up in Daly City, right? Yeah, super gray and foggy.
Yep.
And super depressing all the time. And but I was an athlete, and so I played sports quite a bit in high school. So that kept me like juiced up a little bit. But
And the Academy was your first choice for going to college?
No. Well, it's really interesting. When I was in school, I was actually a really smart kid, but the peer pressure and all that in high school, it was so intense, where it was like, if you were really smart and people knew it, at the school I went to, it didn't go so well.
Smart jocks don't go far, it seems like.
Yeah. It does not mix, right? So I did just enough to skate by, but not enough to excel. I played myself down, but I had opportunities that I was getting passed up on. So I had to go to JUCO. So I went to college of San Mateo. And so to give you context of that, is the year that I went is the year that there was a coach there, Tom Martinez. He had just retired. This is the guy who mentored Tom Brady.
Okay.
All the time, right? And Julian Edelman went to the same school that I went to play football, same place. He just was there a couple years after me, to give you context. So that's where I was at. And so I went to play football. That was me.
What position?
Receiver. I was a receiver. In high school, I played receiver all over the secondary, and I was like a backup quarterback.
See, that makes me feel good because I was a very terrible ninth string nose guard at the same time where I was deep into the photography department and working in the dark room,
Yeah.
and being the guy with glasses who was on the team with a 4.0 because we had football classes.
Yeah. I played myself down in high school, but I knew once I got out of high school that I would not do that again. And so I remember I went into the coach's office, and now when I think about it, I could see how this could come off as sort of cocky and arrogant, but I didn't intend it. I walked in, I said, I'm going to play hard. I'm going to practice hard. I'm going to give you everything I got, but I'm not going to be one of those guys who's going to have PE from sun up to sundown. I'm going to have classes. I'm going to have biology. I'm going to do all these things. I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. Right. And here, this is the irony, right? So then like later on, one day I'm walking and like, he's looking at me like, okay, I mean, this is a strange bird. And then last year he comes in and there was like a letter from Columbia, trying to recruit me. Right. Now, I don't know what would have happened if I went all the way with that. I wasn't the best student. I was the okay student, But that goes to show you, like, because of that, he had to have sent stuff to me, to them, and then, but that goes to show, like, when you state who you are and what you're about from the beginning, people respond in a certain way in turn. And so he treated me like I'm an intelligent person, artist, not just a jock.
And that bravado can really, it can make or break you. It's like, okay, you laid it out there. You better back it up.
Exactly. So like cocky and confident, it's like that borderline, and arrogance it's a real strong borderline. Like in my mind, I never thought of myself as cocky nor arrogant, but I always felt confident. And that's because of sports. The amount of effort and things that you have to put into that drive you, and like to give you context, because I think this relates to everything in art. When I was really young, I had a neighbor who, he was a really cool guy. He kind of mentored me when I was like 13, kind of transitioning into high school. I was really skinny. I was always a late bloomer. So that's why I don't even look my age now. I always look way younger. And so it's a blessing now, right? But then it wasn't. I was really little, and I always loved sports, but I was not going to play football nor basketball in high school. I was just like, I'm not good enough nor big enough. I don't want to play with those. They're just huge. And he took me under his wings and started telling me, look, when I played in junior college, I was like 135. I'm like, no way. And like, he started showing me tapes and pictures, and he started putting in my mind that don't put limitations. Like you got to have, like, from a sports analogy, like you have to have a little dog in you. You got to be willing to fight. It's like, I'm seeing you be very passive. I need you to be a little bit more. I remember one time he would start training me to play receiver because that was his position. And I don't know if he really believed in me or not, but I know he pushed me in a way. Because I remember one time I was really like 13, 14, and there were some guys in the neighborhood that were like 17, 18. Now, when you're thinking about that age, that's a big difference between.
That's a huge difference. Huge. That's almost a grown man.
Exactly. And this guy is out there, we're playing, and they were coming around like, talking trash, like, what you guys doing, blah, blah, blah. And he just was like, he could talk so much trash. It was like, he was talking and talking and talking. But the problem was, he wasn't talking about what he was going to do. He was telling these grown-ups what I was going to do to them.
This little guy who you don't see is going to whomp your butt.
Yeah. And
get ready.
And you see their nose flare, and they're angry, and they want to take me out. They're so angry. And he said, now get over there, and they're going to guard you. And now you go do what we did. And I'm petrified, but he put me out there in a way that I had no choice but to go and try. And what happened was, to me, it was a miracle. I did the move, boom, 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 burnt the guy. And then they were really angry. Now they're coming even more. So now the intensity, and so we're sitting out there for 20 minutes, and they're getting angrier and angrier. They're pulling off clothes, like, to try to beat this little kid, and I'm scrawny, right? But so this is the reason why I bring this up, because I want the students to hear this. That set the stage for me to be willing to walk out on the edge and take a risk, be willing to fail, and go. It is what it is. It's like, you may get me, but we're going to go. All right. I may fail, but I'm going. Right. I'm going. And then when you have, and all it takes is one or two successes. and you stack on them. And the thing is, when I do fail, I just do my best not to. I always try to think of it as like, what can I learn from this and add it to my tool belt.
You hear that a lot in some of the more technical arts, like in cameramen and film and photographers. It's got a lot of bravado when you're working in that industry, and then when you're working with fine artists, it's kind of more, quiet and subdued, and we're going to do it. But like, if like you're talking about how you're working freelance and you got to get yourself out there and you got to cut through the noise. It does require that. Well, I'm going to think I'm the best, whether I'm not. I better figure it out.
Yeah. And the way I think of it, like in truth, it's like, because I actually don't mind the idea of being the best or not. But what I do like the way I like to think of it is, this is how I rein in myself so I don't get out of control. I go, you know what? I do know that I have talent. It's undeniable. But I'm not the only one that has talent. And once I know that, it brings it back into perspective. The issue is when you think you're the only one. That's when you got yourself in trouble, because now you think you're the only one who's going to be the best one. You're the only one that can do the job. And then you'll get yourself in trouble. That's when you have an ego, and nobody wants that ego around.
So now is when we cut to that Rocky IV training montage of you getting out your pens and paints and airbrush and da-da-da, da-da-da.
I mean, honestly, and in truth, I'm going to be honest with you, it's very much like that. Right? I grew up on that stuff. And I came from that background. So when I walked into art school, I was supposed to go one more year to practice, or one more year to play. And it was summer. And I was also, I didn't mention this, I got accepted to go to Morehouse. That's a historically Black college, Martin Luther King and all that stuff. So
very, very important school for a lot of people.
So
you don't turn that one down.
You don't. And I got accepted. And I was initially supposed to go that fall. And I was going to go into political science. At that time, I was I wanted to become like a civil rights lawyer or something like that. That was really a passion of mine at that time. And so I had counselors, and I drew in college. So they would see some of the artwork that I did, and I was doing the airbrush t-shirts and stuff. But I had a counselor, and she put me to the side and said, like, are you sure this is the right thing for you? I mean, like, a lot of people can't do this, like this art. Like, are you sure? Like, I really want you to really consider what you're doing first. And that's when I went up to the academy, just on a whim. And I just wanted to go look in the halls. I walked around. I saw art on the walls. My heart started pounding on my chest. Like, I want to do that. I can do that. I want to do that. I can do that. And literally, I signed up on the spot. I didn't care. And this is what I mean. Like, this is where you do have to do something. I didn't look to see what the school was. I didn't see who was teaching. I just saw art on the wall. That's all I needed. Like, there was art on the wall. And then I just said, I'm an athlete. I'm going to take the athlete training, and I'm going to come in here and get busy. And that's exactly what I quit. I quit literally football, everything on the spot. Some people say burn bridges. I burned bridges. Everyone, my mother was mad. Everybody was mad.
You didn't burn bridges, man. You salted the earth when you left.
Yeah. So it was like, and literally I had like a finals to do. I don't recommend this to people, right?
Just so we're clear, don't everybody do this.
But I think it's important to give context to how I'm wired, really. And so I was like, I'm not going back. I'm going all in. And I didn't take a couple finals. So I knew that was going to just radically blow up all my college stuff.
Oh, man.
And I knew. And when I came to school, it was like I walked in. I was not the best. You got people coming in here. They've been drawing their entire life. I drew. Everybody draws. But, I drew off and on. Sometimes I draw some sports characters, and then I wouldn't. I would do it in the school, but I never perceived myself as an artist.
Seeing somebody who's been classically trained, or someone who's been drawing 5 years longer than you, you're like, oh man, what was I thinking?
Yeah. So I just walked in, and it was like, okay, the gauntlet's, thrown down, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to fall back on who I am and what I do. And, I'm going to work hard. And I just went full throttle.
So you definitely became the artist athlete, with the emphasis on the artist, but the soul of the gridiron on that.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's intense.
Yeah, and it was before they had sports here at the school. Because I tell you, if they would have sports, I would have definitely played basketball.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't the best basketball player, but it's just like I'm talking now a little bit in like my nature is coming out. Like when I'm in school, I do modify this
Sure,
quite a
of
bit,
course.
right? But there's this thing where it's like, okay, so when people talk about like they're really competitive with art and things like that, I don't really think of art as competition. I just don't. To me, competition is when you're going like 101, where you're really going at it. Like that's competition. Like art is really, I mean, in many ways, there's a spiritual component to it, right? But there's also the ability to get up for the task and go out for it. It's like, Homer's Odyssey, right? It's all that stuff. It's Luke. It's like, it's all of the hero's journey. It's like, do you have the courage to go for it? And it's not about, and for me, this is the biggest mistake everyone makes. And I've made this mistake myself. I've made this and I still make it. But the biggest mistake that people make is they obsess with the end goal, and it's not about the end goal. It's about, did you have the courage to follow your passion? And did you have the courage to give it all you got? Or are you just sort of like, oh, I kind of like that, would like to do that, but I'm just going to kind of tap out and just not do it. Like, so for me, this is how I'm wired. And I think that way, and I push those buttons in me. Now, I do suppress it, and I suppressed it with people, and sometimes, and I tried to modify it quite a bit. But I'm going to tell you, whenever I modified this, when you're not true to who you are in your nature, you will be miserable. You're going to die a slow death. And it's like you want to be around people who can help foster who you are and embrace it and then go for it. And then, you will be unstoppable, right? And you can find a way, like, so we were talking about making, being an illustrator, like you can find ways to make money. So people feel like, oh, all you got to do is go out and work for people. No, you don't. And so people go, okay, I'll just do the Etsy thing. Okay, you can do Etsy. I'm not knocking Etsy. If you're willing to take chances and not feel like a failure, there's so many ways you can make money. I could just rattle off many ways. Like somebody came up with the idea. I got an idea. People love wine. I got an idea. Let's just put some paint out there and let them drink wine.
Right.
Right?
$1 million later.
Yeah, exactly. And all the pure artists are walking around looking at them like, oh, sellouts and blah, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. I'm like, okay. But guess what? They have money to allow them to do whatever they want with their art.
It's interesting you go straight to that, because there is something, I find this when I talk to illustrators. I think it's illustrators and photographers who go very much hand in hand, because there's a lot of a very fine art bent to what illustrators and photographers do. And then there's this, I can make money now doing something that nobody else can, which I know how to do step 1 through 10, like it's making a cup of coffee. And
Right.
there's that mentality that it does seem with a technical artist, because there's a lot of technical illustration that people forget about, that it seems like, illustrators do have this kind of like, yeah, let's go. Let's do it. Let's run. I don't care. What do you want me to draw? Tell me. But how does that translate then into you're getting ready to graduate and you're starting to build a career? What did you go after? Was there a specific genre you wanted to, or was it just bring it on and let's knock it down?
When I graduated, it was just at the tail end of the movie poster in Drew Struzan's era in Rain. But I think it was like late 90s when it was like really starting to wrap up. But that was what I wanted to do all the way through school. So when I think I was a sophomore, and this is like no web and all that stuff. So I went down there.
If you're lucky, and where you're going to find it is a yellow pages or a white pages.
Exactly. I don't even know what they call it now, but back then I think they called it information. So all you young people,
right?
We didn't have a cell phone.
There were physical buttons you had to push.
And it was awesome because I picked up this phone and I said, "Hello, may I have Drew Struzan's phone number?" And they gave it to me. This is real talk. They gave me his phone number. And so now I got the phone. Now let me tell you guys. So when I say like I do these things, I don't want to get it twisted. I'm scared out of my mind when I do it, but I just do it anyway, right? So I'm like, got to call him. I'm like hyperventilating. I'm like, oh my God, this is like Drew Struzan. I'm like, I'm freaking out. But I just got the courage and I called him. I said, hey, I'm from San Francisco. I go to that school. You use airbrush. I do. Not a lot of people use that up there. I would just love it if you could just look at my portfolio, if I can just stop by, and I would just be so grateful. And he's like, I'm sick right now. Called me back in a day or so. I called him back in a couple of days. He's like, okay, come on over. And he gave me his address. The studio is in the back of his house. It's built to the back. So if anybody's questioning whether I'm telling the truth, so it's in the back on a corner. It was sort of long, skinny, as I remember. And it had like a glass door. And it was sort of like an octagonal sort of entranceway, I believe it was. Is this a long time ago, right? Over 20 years ago. I went in, there he was, very gracious, kind, let me in. You start seeing, he had some paintings up on the wall, but when you see the originals, it was another story, because now you could see the layering of the paint, and you could see the pencils layered underneath it. It was a totally different animal. And this is why this was important, because when I went in there, he was nice, and he was just letting me walk up to him and look at the paintings. He was just showing me all this stuff. And by me seeing the original and not a printed version, I knew what the real standard was.
Right. Okay.
Because a printed version, right? A printed version, if I'm a student, I'm going to go and just work and do stuff that mimics the print. And you think that's good. You're just going up to a certain level. But when you think about it, when he's sending these paintings to people, they're seeing it, it's like 10 times better than that. So it told me what my level had to really be to get work.
I mean, a lot of people forget when you're talking at this level, it's a painting. It's not an airbrush artwork. It's not it's not an illustration. It is a piece of fine art. It's like you said, there's the pencil drawing, the colored pencil drawing, maybe some marker, some airbrush, highlights, gouache, some varnish here and there, a couple of tricks that no one's going to tell you about, and then it goes off and it's photographed, and from then on. And these things are massive.
Yeah, they're big.
Mean, these are not small pieces of work. These are door frame size pieces.
Exactly.
The person who's never been through art school or hasn't seen a painter work, they think, oh, you do 1 or 2 paintings a year. It's like, no, you're doing 20, 30, 40 paintings a month, every quarter. I mean, you're producing.
The production level is much higher now because of digital. I think back then with publishing, especially because back then we used to have to FedEx stuff back to New York, right? Mm-hmm. And so that whole process, and you had to FedEx your portfolio. It was very expensive to get started in this business in the past.
So you get to meet one of your idols. What then do you start to work on? Is it just a hodgepodge, or are you going and trying to find some stuff that you're looking for? Because you did posters, correct?
Yes.
Was it sports related, or was it?
That became sort of my thing. So when I graduated school, I got illustration reps, and because back then it was really a big deal to have a rep, because we didn't again have the internet. So I had a rep in New York and I had one in LA, and the one in New York, they were getting me jobs like right out of school. So it would just be these sort of random sort of publishing sort of cover pieces, just nothing sexy, but just good solid work, typical pay on those. It might be like, $2 to $3 grand for like, about 2 weeks work. It was, it wasn't great. It wasn't bad. For me, I was excited about it, especially coming out of school. Yeah, I could live.
You were actually able to eat.
So it came out, and I was like, okay, this is cool. I'm getting my feet wet, and I'm like, okay, I can't complain. And I kept doing that, and then I got a job and I'll kind of get to the sports posters, but I got a job at Wet Studios, and this was sort of fundamental right before I got into the sports stuff. So I had my reps, and I'm doing work for them. I wasn't, and again, I was young, a little immature, because it wasn't kind of the projects that I wanted. So I didn't emotionally get up for every single illustration, which was, it's just immaturity. Like, I'm totally different now. But I got a job at this Wet Studios, and this is what really started to turn me into a professional. I always tell people it was a classic rock and roll studio. It was right next to the ballpark, right before Pac-Bell Park came. That's kind of what shut and changed everything down, removed everything. But it was this studio right there. And no one's going to remember this, but there was Tower Records in San Francisco.
Okay. Always an epicenter of what's going on in any city they're at.
Yeah. And so like this Tower Records was a big deal. And what was fancy or special about Tower Records, the one, I believe it's in Columbus, was the street, I believe. They had these big 6 by 6 feet wood panels of painted album covers, like literally someone painted these and they would mount them up outside.
Right. Yeah. I think all the tower. I grew up in LA, and all the tower records I think had that, and they would change. It was like, oh
so
wow,
Wet Studios, like that was one of their bread and butter things that they did. So you airbrush and paint those out, and then we would also do all the concert backdrops. I mean, we worked on stuff for Santana, U2, everything. And so you can imagine, and this is one thing why having a good portfolio is important, because I show my portfolio, I got in. And so normally in those kind of environments, it's sort of like a pecking order and you have to work your way up to the top. But I show up my stuff and I got to work on like some of the better jobs in the studio right away. I still had to earn my stripes, but I was like always in that top, 10% in terms of projects. And it was fantastic. And I mean, we worked on all kinds of stuff and it was amazing. And why I bring that up, that's what turned me into a pro, because they would hand me like, my stack of album covers and they'd say, okay, we need 4 of these maybe in a week and a half, or they might give me 1, we need this tomorrow. And you're talking about 6 by 6 feet and it's got to be photorealistic, airbrush and paint. You had to move. And they taught you how to mix paint because this is all traditional. So I had to hand mix paint, take my shopping cart, and it was like move it over there, and I'm like spraying and it's like doing all this stuff, and
you're like, what are you doing, graffiti, a mural? It's just work.
Yeah, so it was very intense, but that intensity and just learning how to work fast, really, really fast, helped me, because then that's when I started to when I started to transition out of that. When I finally left that, I went up to Sacramento, and that's when I started getting into sports stuff. I believe the company was Sierra Sun. I believe it was. That was the primary company that I did stuff for. And then I would do stuff for, I can't remember the album, the magazine covers.
Again, that's another thing that doesn't exist anymore, but has kind of come full circle where, the idea of a collectible. And now we have, now collectibles are totally different. But the idea of your collectible art and fan art, and I mean, even some of that stuff, some of that sports stuff is almost concept art, because it's like this doesn't exist, and we're trying to make illustration or almost fine art for the masses.
Yeah,
it was definitely. I remember that stuff. I mean, getting an actual poster size lithograph, of a painterly style, then autographed by the artist, then autographed by the player, that was the premier doctor level gift or dentist gift.
It was awesome. Yeah. Limited edition. And it was very similar to that whole thing with the comics. You get some that look like on fine art watercolor paper, then you get some that are foiled with embossing, so I did a few of those that got done that way. So it was enjoyable, and it was sort of a natural fit for me, because it was like it allowed me to use some of the Jushu San kind of, and I use him. He's like shorthand for just saying posters that are composited, right? Because that's my generation. That's what we say. But it was allowed me to do that composited imagery and paint it by hand, but yet use some of the things I knew and I was emotionally connected to, even though there was some time since I was really involved in it. But it was sort of a natural fit, and I had a good emotional connection to it, I think.
That's important. I mean, if you're not emotionally connected to your artwork, it's just it's just dog food on a plate. I mean, it's not that exciting.
Exactly.
So when does the switch come to being a digital artist now?
A couple things happened. So when I went up to Sacramento, right, Davis, I lived in Davis but worked in Sacramento. I had just left Wet Studios. And so I went up there and, I was doing freelance and I was doing the sports stuff, and they had a place up there, but I needed like more steady income. And so I was like, what am I going to do? Like there's some studios around here, but like they all need digital skills and I didn't have any. And then what happened, which was sort of like a crushing thing that happened to me, I had sent samples when I had got out of school to ILM. I got 2 letters actually, and sometimes I mix up the story. I got a letter asking for more stuff, and then I send that, and then I got another response where it's like, this is great, send us all your digital stuff. And I had nothing. And I was stubbornly refused to do digital. I was like one of those, I'm an artiste, right?
Of course. Many of us thought that. I'm not going to pick up a digital camera.
Oh yeah, I'm not touching it. Like, I'm not going there. Are you crazy? And that was sort of like the real awakening, where that opportunity of something that I always dreamed to have was just gone and squandered because I wasn't willing to be flexible and learn and grow. And that changed my future, honestly. Because then when I got to Sacramento, I needed a job. When you're in a college town in those areas, it's different than being in the Bay Area where jobs were robust and plentiful, right? I could just walk outside and get a job. It was just easy. When I went up there, it was like, I just need a little part-time job to just cover until my checks come in. And I couldn't find a job. Not even a coffee shop job. They were telling me they wanted me to write 2-page essays. And I was like, it was a very emotional, disturbing moment. Right? Like, I mean, and I have to be dramatic, right? It's very dramatic. Because I'm like, I got a degree, I got the skills. I can't even get a freaking job at Macy's for Christmas. And so I went around to all the studios, all the graphic design studios. And there was one in particular, I kind of got along with them really well. They were really nice and they just loved my portfolio. I was just looking for freelance work. But I was also like, hey, do you have a job? And and they were like, you know what? I can see how you could be a graphic designer. I could see this. And they said, their words, she said, the best graphic designers are usually illustrators. I'm like, okay, cool. Can I have a job? Right? Yeah.
Great.
She's like, we do have a spot, but I offered the job to someone. So I have to see if they're going to take it. And so it said, but do you know computers? I'm like, no, but I can learn.
That's it. One-on-one drill, 50-yard line, no pads. Let's go. Come on.
Yeah, I'm telling you. And she's the principal. And now I want to give you context. So like, our rival school, well, not rival, but how like if we had to say the school that is closely associated, one of them is like Art Center. So she was an Art Center designer. So she was very serious. So what happened, I just said, hey, look, let me prove it. Let me come in here for a week, maybe 2. And show you that I can learn, and it was Adobe Illustrator at the time. Let me show you that I can learn this and do this. So she said, they gave me the manual, right? I took the manual home. I devoured that book, right? I devoured it, literally. I came back the next day. She put me on a computer, and she just let me play around because I didn't have a computer, couldn't afford it. And I sat there. Now, again, I'm an illustrator, and this is why I say it's all the same, because I sat down and like I didn't know the terminology of the language of graphic design, but I knew the visual language. And so she said, hey, do a newsletter. Now, again, that wasn't the kind of work that I did. So I had to quickly look up and see what a newsletter looked like. And I just looked at it. And then I made like a bunch of newsletters as samples for her to see. Now, man, I didn't do type design. I didn't learn all that stuff, but she looked at it and she was just like, man, like, wow. But she couldn't commit because this other person got that job. We were supposed to have the job. And so I was like, and I did this for about a week and a half, but after a while I was like, okay, look, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I got to go get a job. And then I get a phone call from the studio that I put that work in. And they're like, look, the other person didn't accept it and we want to offer you a job. The beauty of that was when I was there is that's when I think I actually became an illustrator, because I saw how illustration was really used. I saw how when the illustrations came in, when people sent samples in, I saw what stayed, what went in the garbage. I saw why.
Interesting.
Right?
Interesting.
We had our staff photographers. We had 3 particular ones we used and like 1 on certain projects. I saw what they got. I saw how those people came in. They would come in with their families when they were dropping off. So I don't know if it was intentional, but I'm gonna tell you, like, I'd be working on my project and like their kids are underneath my feet and it felt like they were connected as a family. Those people get work.
Interesting.
Right?
I'll have to remember that. Next time I'm up for a gig, I'll bring my kid with me. Like, hey, go play, go look sad or eat some ice cream.
It was crazy. It was crazy. It taught me so much because I saw why we kept using certain people. And even if people were really good, and I saw like sometimes people would keep samples, not really for the actual work, but for maybe how it was folded. I saw so much. So then when I left, I knew how to sell and market my work that point forward. because I knew like graphic, like I knew it's like, if I, even now it's like, there's certain ways you can go, like if you want to use Illustrator, you can use it a certain way and what appeals to people. And then you also know the industries and where are you? You know, we're in the Bay Area, so we're tech area. So the illustrations have to reflect that. And then, you know, in New York, even still, if you go to like Broadway and that whole vibe, it's just a different feeling with the work. And so if you're going to live here, you got to do tech.
Right. If you're in the Midwest, you're doing cars all
Yeah.
day long. You're in LA, you're doing
Right.
movies every
Right.
minute.
And so what that taught me was taught me to understand this is a business and start to think of it as a business.
Well, and that's interesting. I mean, you know, a lot of people we've talked to have said that where once you see how they use the artwork, you realize not what you've done wrong, but how somebody who's writing you a check looks at your work, which is very different. Like you may make the most gorgeous thing ever, but if it's not going to fit in an A4 or an 8.5 by 11 page where you've got a gutter and you've got an ad that's got to go here and all of a sudden a column to some text and there's no place to put the text because that text they can't change the color on so it's readable, your artwork doesn't get picked.
Exactly. And what's worse, if they had to take your piece and now they have to spend all day in Photoshop fixing it, disaster.
They're not using you again.
They're not. They're angry. I paid you money to not give me a problem. You gave me a problem.
Oh man.
Right. And now I got to fix your problem. You're not getting hired again. I listen. I didn't know Photoshop at the time because it was all Adobe Illustrator. But then we had, I think, one Photoshop at the time because it was so expensive. But what happened was I started to like illustration and I started to like design more when I stopped doing it traditionally.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Really?
The business, I like painting better traditionally, but doing the business, it opened me up. I actually started to enjoy it because I loved painting in the process so much by hand that I hated making changes. The thought of making, like all that part of it, I was a fine artist. It was very hard for me to go in and just paint stuff out. And so it was very precious. And I was having a hard time getting out of that precious mode. But once I went digital, it was like I was released. And I was like, now I can work free. I was still able to do the work. I was able to be attached enough to do really good work, but not so attached where I couldn't make changes. And that's when everything changed.
Now, if you're not working digital, you're not working at all? Question mark?
Yeah. And you can still do it by hand. You can, right? You can still do oils, you do watercolors, you can do all of that. And because the deliverable is all digital though. So it doesn't matter if you do it traditional, it's going to be delivered digitally. And if you don't do it that way, again, you're going to have somebody looking at you like, huh, what? Like what? At least I can speak for myself. I have not delivered a solid board piece of art, and I can't even remember. I don't even remember the last time I gave someone a board.
What was the reason behind you becoming the go-to master of all at the academy? And I'm giving you
Thank
that
you.
time,
I appreciate that.
But you know, with the classes you teach, it's like, wow, this is a lot of stuff. This is
thank you.
This is no joke.
Yeah, no, thank you. He said it, not me. So I would come like,
hey man, like I said, 9th string defensive tackle. I'm not going toe to toe with you. I'm trying to keep my nose in one piece, man.
I wish it was a short answer, but it's not, and nothing I say is short. So here's the reality. When I was in school, I made goals. Even when I left school, I said, I made a lot of goals. I'm going to, travel. I'm going to be a teacher one day. I'm going to come back and teach. Really? Oh yeah. I knew that. I knew I was going to teach like when I was like maybe a junior.
Oh, wow.
I just knew it. And so, I like to write goals down on papers. I always did this, envelopes, this kind of stuff. I even do this stuff to this day. I like to, every year, people call it New Year's resolution. I make annual goals and I go after them, right? Oh yeah. And then I review them throughout the year and I checked it in a year, what I did, so that was it. I knew I was going to be a teacher. I thought I was going to be a teacher. I thought I was going to start teaching like around my age now though. Right.
Okay.
Right. It's like
I'm done. I'm ready to retire. I'll do one painting a year.
And so when I taught, with everything, I had some really fantastic teachers and I had a few that were just not so great. And it wasn't even technical ability, but it was a personality that you could see they were competing with students sometimes, and they weren't really there to help them. They were more to like squash dreams, right? And I hate to say that,
Right.
but that's the reality.
Sure.
And I hate bullies. So when I saw some of that bullying, I knew I'm going to be a teacher and I'm going to come back. And I started thinking about it. It's like, so where most people go like, who am I and why should I be able to teach? I changed it. I flipped the script. I'm going, who was the worst teacher I ever had? I'm being honest with you. This is how I did it. Who was the worst teacher I ever had? Can I do what they did? Yeah, I'm better than that. So that was all I needed. I looked for any angle to get me motivated to go forward. I'm like, I can do it. The minimal, I can do that minimal, but I know I'll do better than that. So I think I'm willing to go take a chance that I could at least be better, I think. I have a thirst for learning and desire to just grow, and I know what I want as a student. And so I just project that on other people, and then I try to get what they want. People want to learn. They want to be motivated. They want to be driven. They want to become better, and they don't want to feel like they're put down. They don't want to feel like I'm terrible and I can never be great. They want to know and see that it can happen.
It's interesting you say it that way, because there is something that makes art school different than so many other paths of education where, especially illustrators more than anybody, I think, is you're learning to be your own boss. When you're done, you got to go out and hustle. And even if you happen to work with a studio, you're still hustling. And it's like, if you're getting a law degree, you go work at a law firm. You get a degree in medicine, you're going to go, sew stitches. I mean, but if you're getting a fine art degree, every class is breaking you down, building you back up, figuring out what you're good, getting better, new techniques. You do have to have that kind of, you need someone like you going, all right, let's do it.
And it's hard because, I don't want to make it sound like, I know there are fantastic teachers all around, and I take as much from them and I wrap it all up and try to put it into how I teach. So I think the thing is, I know there are people who are passionate, and I'm going to give you a story here, and I'm not going to give a name, but I'm going to tell you, there's a colleague here at school, and I want to say this to everybody, because sometimes people talk about art school and art teachers and teachers in general. They don't care. And he may listen to this, but I'm not going to say his name. But I remember there was one of our students, he was going through a real hard time, and he talked to me. I knew a little bit about his family history, some really tragic stuff. And he was about to be homeless. Now, this is an academy teacher. No, and the academy doesn't know this. Nobody knows this. And I'm saying this because, and this is the kind of character some of these people are. He sold his car. He went and got this kid an apartment in his name and put him in there.
Oh my God.
Okay. So when people complain and talk about art teachers and art school and all that, like, you don't know what you're talking about. I know real sacrifice. I know people who put their careers on the line fighting for students. So these are the people that inspire me, period. So when we teach, I try to be as empathetic as possible and be aware that these kids, and they're not kids, but young adults, have lives, and there's tragedies going on as much as other things. So the way I teach is all driven by willing to allow myself to have some emotional connection and empathy. It makes teaching much harder. And even with that, because I want to also bring a positive light to it, there's also that emotional connection to doing positive and uplifting images. And the thing is, when you see one of your students do well, they get a project or they get awards in the Society of Illustrators, and they would come to me and say, I got offered this job, that job, what should I do? Like, they're coming to me, asking me, because, and now you can understand, it made me feel like so happy for them and their hard work and what they were accomplished. It made me feel like my life's work has meaning, right? Because if you don't have this balance, then you become the resentful teacher. And now you don't want to teach anybody, and you become angry, and now you feel like you got to hold back, you got to hold secrets, and I'm competing with you. So I don't ever want to be that person. So I always want to be able to come into it with the sense, like, I'm here for a purpose. I'm here to give, and I'm here to serve, and I'm going to try different methods. I'm going to try to do things that is going to help people. I don't want to ever limit myself again. I did that in high school. I did that certain parts in my personal life and career because I made some sacrifices that probably, in retrospect, I'm really glad that I did because there were invaluable learning lessons, right? But what I learned even now, and maybe that's why I'm coming a little strong right now, is that it's important to know who you are in your nature and never sacrifice, and then go all in and just go all in. And so for you and for any of you out there too, because so this can be a little rah-rah, I don't ever sleep and da-da-da-da. Right. Okay. Some of
the mad psychotic artist
like that's not. I don't want to state that because I also believe in the aspect of trying to have balance in your life, trying to have downtime, enjoy your family, love your family, and all that kind of stuff. And like I really believe in that. Really, so much. I believe in that more, and that's really where the biggest sacrifices come from. So if I have a choice, I'm going to give it to my family, to my girls, right? So there is another side to that. You're wired to go nonstop all day long. Some people are not. Yeah. And so if you're not, don't beat yourself up thinking you got to be like the people who are. You accept who you are, and all you need to do is make 1% improvement every day. And that's all I do, 1% every day. And to this day, people don't believe me, but like there's not one semester, there's not one night, there's not one day that I'm not learning a new something.
So, you got all that? That was a lot to cover with Robert. And I highly suggest you go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/Creative Mind Podcast to see more of Robert's art and deep dive into what he does, because it's really fascinating to see his work and how he went from traditional airbrush and watercolor to being at the forefront of the digital design world. So let's wrap it up. And again, please subscribe on whatever device you're listening to so you never miss an episode of Creative Mind. Thanks for listening.